After we got married, my husband and I kept sleeping in separate rooms. At first, I asked if he could move into the primary bedroom. He refused without the slightest hesitation. No, Rosalie would mind. If it weren't for you, we wouldn't have ended up like this. Let's just keep things this way. Rosalie was his first love. I stood there frozen for a long time before finally saying, okay. Later, I told myself that this marriage was only meant to help my family survive a cash flow crisis and solve a difficult lawsuit his company was facing. It was just a fair exchange. Once everything was settled, we would naturally go our separate ways. After that, I never brought it up again. For the next 3 years, he brought her to every occasion. Family dinners, annual galas, even my mother's birthday. She was always the one standing beside him. Everyone kept guessing who the real woman of the house was. Now, everything that needed to be solved has been solved, and it is time for me to leave. I sat in the study and read the divorce agreement from beginning to end one more time. Everything was written clearly in black and white in the property division section. I asked for nothing. The house he had owned before marriage would remain his. The car would remain his. Company shares had nothing to do with me. All I needed to take was my own savings. I signed my name on the agreement. Natalie Ramsey 3 years ago. I had still believed that, even though this marriage began as a transaction, maybe we could still make something decent out of it. I was so stupid back then. I put the agreement into a folder and placed it on the coffee table. Then I took out my phone and opened our chat. Come home earlier today. I have something to discuss with you. About 2 minutes later, one word appeared beside his profile picture. Okay. I turned off my phone and tossed it onto the couch. Then I went to the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. The kitchen was huge with a double-door refrigerator, a built-in oven, and German imported cookware, all arranged neatly in its place. I rarely used it when we had just gotten married. I tried cooking a few times, thinking he might like to come home to a hot meal. The first time I made braised ribs. He tasted one bite and said it was fine. Then he took a phone call and left saying something had happened with Rosalie. The second time I made fish stew. He did not come home at all. The third time I cooked an entire table of food, working from 4 o'clock in the afternoon until 7 o'clock at night. He did come home that time, but Rosalie was behind him. The two of them walked in laughing and talking. When he saw the table full of dishes, he froze for a second, then said, "We already have plans going out to eat." Rosalie stood behind him, tilted her head, and smiled at me. You worked so hard. Even now, remembering that smile still makes my stomach turn sour. After that, I never cooked again. At 7 o'clock that evening, he did not come home. At 8, he still was not home. At 9 o'clock, my phone rang. I picked it up and saw a message from him. Something came up with Rosalie. I'll be home late. Go to bed first. Don't wait for me. I stared at that message for a long time. Go to bed first. Don't wait for me. I had heard that sentence for 3 years. Every time it was like this. Every time it was Rosalie. There was always something going on with her. He always had to deal with it. When she had a cold, he had to keep her company. When she was upset, he had to keep her company. When she moved, he had to help. Even when she adopted a cat, he had to be there. Once, Rosalie said she wanted cake from a bakery across town. He drove 40 minutes to buy it, delivered it to her apartment, and waited until she finished eating before coming home. By then it was already 1 o'clock in the morning. I asked him, "Did you eat dinner?" He said, "I ate at Rosalie's." Then he showered and went into the study. I should have understood everything that day, but I did not. I kept thinking that since we were married, we should give each other time. Maybe after enough days passed, he would realize I was not that bad. Maybe if I did well enough, he would be willing to turn around and look at this home. Now that I think about it, if someone has no place for you in his heart, it does not matter how well you do, he will not fall in love with you because you are good. He will only think your goodness has nothing to do with him. I did not reply to his message. Before I would always reply with, "Okay," to show him that I understood. Sometimes I would add, "Be careful," as if that made me generous and sensible. But today, I did not want to reply. In a few days, I would not receive his messages anymore. Anyway, I put my phone on the coffee table and changed the channel with the remote. A variety show was playing on TV. A few celebrities were laughing loudly on stage. I leaned back against the couch and suddenly found the scene absurd. I was sitting in this 2,000 square foot house guarding a marriage that existed in name only, waiting for a man who would never keep me in his heart to come home. And he was with his first love openly, rightfully. Because when we first got married, he had already made himself very clear. If it were not for you, we would not have ended up like this. What he meant was that I had broken him and Rosalie apart. That I had inserted myself between them and forced them to separate. That I had used my family's influence in that lawsuit to force his name onto a marriage certificate with mine. But what was the truth? Truth was that my father's company had a broken cash flow and urgently needed capital, and his company was caught in a troublesome lawsuit that needed my family's connections to settle. The elders from both families sat down for one meal and decided on this marriage. No one asked if I wanted to marry him. No one asked if he was willing to marry me. But in everyone's eyes, it was a fair trade. He provided money. My family provided connections. We each got what we needed. Only Rosalie became the sacrifice in that transaction. Probably believed I stole her place. That I turned her from the legitimate girlfriend into the first love who had to hide in the shadows. So he gave all his guilt to Rosalie and left all his coldness for me. On our wedding night, he drank a lot and was helped into the bedroom. I took off his coat and loosened his tie. He grabbed my wrist, his grip frighteningly strong. Natalie Ramsey, he called my full name, his voice. I know exactly what this marriage is. I don't love you and I never will. If you're smart, you'll behave and be Mrs. Whitmore and name only. Don't expect me to touch you. Then he let go of me and stumbled into the guest room. From then on, we slept in separate rooms. He slept in the guest room. I slept in the primary bedroom. It suddenly occurred to me that in these 3 years, he'd only entered the primary bedroom twice. The first time was our wedding night when he said those words. The second time was last year when I had a fever of 103 degrees and was barely conscious. Mrs. Lane called him. He came home 2 hours later, stood at the bedroom door, glanced at me, and told Mrs. Lane to take me to the hospital. Then he left again. He said Rosalie had an important party and he had to attend. He did not come home for the rest of the night. When I woke up at 7 o'clock the next morning, I glanced at my phone. There were no messages. After washing up, I went downstairs. Mrs. Lane was already preparing breakfast. Seeing me come down alone, she opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but in the end, she only asked, "Ma'am, what would you like for breakfast?" "Plain oatmeal is fine." I sat down at the dining table and my phone screen lit up. It was a message from him. Rosalie drank too much last night, so I stayed with her and took care of her. I have a meeting this morning and won't be back. Put down my phone and took a sip of oatmeal. "Mrs., please buy a few more cardboard boxes for me over the next few days." She froze. "Ma'am, are you moving?" "Yes, in a few days." She opened her mouth as if she wanted to ask something, but when she saw my expression, she swallowed the words back down. She had worked in this house for 3 years. She had seen everything. She understood everything. "All right, ma'am," she answered and turned back into the kitchen. After finishing my oatmeal, I went upstairs and changed. I had made an appointment with a real estate agent today. Before I moved out of this house, I needed to find a new place to stay. The divorce agreement said I would take none of the marital assets, but that did not mean I was penniless. I had some savings from before the marriage. Over the past 3 years, even though I had not worked, the Whitmore family had deposited $20,000 into my account every month for living expenses. I had barely spent any of it and had saved most of it together. That was enough for me to rent a decent apartment and support myself for a year or so. For what came after that, I would think about it later. The agent was a young woman with a ponytail who spoke very quickly. She showed me a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of the city, not far from downtown. The neighborhood was nice, too. "Miss Ramsey, this unit has excellent natural light. The landlord just renovated it, and all the furniture and appliances are new. The rent is $6,500 a month. What do you think?" I stood on the balcony and looked around. The view was open and I could see a park in the distance. The apartment was not big, but it was more than enough for one person. Most importantly, there were no memories of Adrian Whitmore. Here, this works. Take it. The agent clearly did not expect me to decide so quickly. She froze for a second, then smiled brightly. Great. Great. I'll contact the landlord right away and arrange the lease. I signed a 1-year lease and paid the deposit and rent. When I walked out with the keys, the sun was warm and bright. Standing by the road with the keys in my hand, I suddenly felt very light. That afternoon, when I returned home, Mrs. Lane had already placed several cardboard boxes in the living room. I was about to go upstairs to pack the walk-in closet. When I heard movement at the door, I did not turn around, but I already had a faint feeling. Sure enough, in the next second, a familiar voice sounded behind me. "Oh, you're home." I turned around. Rosalie Quinn stood in the entryway. She saw the box in my hand and her gaze paused on me for a second. "Are you packing?" I did not answer her question. I only asked calmly, "Why are you here?" "Adrian brought me. My lease is up and I haven't found a new place yet. He told me I could stay here for now, for as long as I need." I only nodded and said, "Oh." Rosalie clearly had not expected this reaction. Her smile stiffened for a moment. "You don't mind, do you?" She tilted her head and looked at me. "Actually, I also think it's a little inconvenient, but Adrian insisted," I said. "If he told you to come, then stay." I interrupted her. "There are plenty of rooms here anyway." She pressed her lips together and walked over to sit by the couch. "You're really generous. Generous enough to marry into this house back then, and now generous enough to let me move in." I looked at her and suddenly found it a little funny. I did not respond. I turned to go upstairs. Rosalie probably felt ignored. Her voice rose a little. "Natalie, I'm talking to you." I stopped and looked back at her. "I heard you, but you didn't come here to chat with me, so why waste each other's time?" "I still have things to pack." Rosalie stood up. The smile on her face disappeared completely. "You're leaving?" She blurted, disbelief in her tone. "What else?" "Stay here on third wheel for the two of you." Rosalie stood completely stunned. I turned and walked upstairs, leaving her alone in the living room. Opening my closet, I began taking down my clothes one by one. After 3 years, I barely had enough belongings to fill 2 boxes. Adrian had never taken me shopping, nor had he ever given me a gift for our anniversary, my birthday, or Valentine's Day. Looking back now, it was almost laughable. As I taped the last box shut, my phone chimed with a message from Adrian. "I have a business dinner tonight and won't be home for dinner. Rosalie just moved in. Please arrange a guest room for her." I set the phone aside and kept packing. Evening. I had finished packing the closet and the study, carrying the folder containing the divorce agreement. Downstairs, I saw Rosalie sitting on the couch sipping coffee. She looked up, her eyes immediately fixing on the folder in my hand. "What's that?" I tossed the folder onto the coffee table and sat in the armchair across from her. Rosalie stared at it for a few seconds, then let out a soft laugh. "A divorce agreement." My silence gave her her answer. Her eyes lit up, not with shock, but with unmistakable excitement. "You're really divorcing him?" "Yes." "When?" She pressed. "When he comes home tonight," I said evenly. This marriage was always just a trade. Now that everything is settled, ending it sooner is better for everyone. She stared at me for a long time. Her expression complicated now. Suddenly, she lowered her voice. "Do you really not like him, or are you just pretending?" I froze for a moment. Did I not like him? 3 years ago, I actually had expectations. Adrian was handsome, successful, and commanding. I thought if I was good enough, considerate enough, and sensible enough, he might turn my way eventually. But those expectations died a long time ago. "It doesn't matter anymore," I answered quietly. "Whether I liked him or not belongs in the past." At 9 that night, Adrian finally came home. He glanced at Rosalie on the couch first, his gaze softening immediately. "Rosalie, are you settling in all right?" "It's very nice," he replied sweetly. Only then did Adrian turn his attention to me. His eyes swept over me, lingered on the folder on the coffee table, and finally landed on the stacked boxes behind me. His brows furrowed. What's with all these boxes? I stood up, picked up the folder from the coffee table, and held it out to him. Adrian, we need to talk. He didn't take it, looking at me with a trace of confusion. What is this? A divorce agreement? I said. The silence in the living room stretched until it felt as thin and brittle as glass. Adrian did not reach out to take the folder. He stood near the entryway, his expensive dark coat half unbuttoned, his tie loosened just enough to reveal the sharp, unyielding line of his throat. His eyes moved from the white paper folder in my hands down to the neat stack of taped cardboard boxes near the staircase and finally back up to my face. For a fraction of a second, something flickered darkened in his eyes. A flicker of annoyance perhaps, or the cold reflex of a man accustomed to being in control of every room he walked into. What is this? He asked again. His tone was smooth, measured, and stripped of warmth. Exactly as it had been for the past 3 years. A new game, Natalie. If you're looking for attention, you picked a poor evening for it. Behind him, Rosalie sat up a little straighter on the sofa. She didn't speak, but her hands cupped her porcelain coffee cup tightly, her eyes darting between the two of us with sharp, unspoken anticipation. It's not a game, I said quietly. I placed the folder on the glass surface of the coffee table right next to where Rosalie had laid her keys. The terms are simple. You don't need your lawyers to spend days going through it. I asked for 0 alimony, 0 company equity, and none of your premarital real estate. The car stays with you. The house stays with you. All I am taking is what was mine before the marriage and the living allowance your family deposited into my account over the last 3 years. Adrian scoffed. A short, humorless sound that barely rustled the quiet room. You expect me to believe you're walking away with nothing? 3 years of waiting around, and now you're suddenly playing the martyr. I'm not playing anything. I said 3 years ago, this marriage saved my father's business from insolvency and my family's legal team cleared the regulatory hold on Whitmore Enterprises' offshore expansion. The transaction was completed long ago. I stayed until the final compliance audit passed last month, so neither of our families would face public scrutiny. Now there is no reason to prolong it. I looked directly into his eyes. There was no anger in my voice, no lingering bitterness, no desperate plea for him to contradict me. It was just a statement, a fact cold and clear as morning ice. Adrian's jaw tightened. He looked down at the folder again. For 3 years, he had operated under the absolute conviction that I was an intruder who had calculated every move to trap him into matrimony, a greedy, opportunistic woman who had torn him away from his soft, helpless Rosalie. To see me hand him a complete surrender signed and clean black ink without asking for a single dime of his fortune shattered the narrative he had built to justify his cruelty. Sign it when your lawyer reviews it, I added, stepping back toward the stairs. Or sign it now. It doesn't matter to me. I've already moved my things into the hallway. I'll be gone before breakfast. Natalie. Adrian's voice dropped lace with a harsh warning. If you walk out that door tonight, don't think you can use your father's health or another company crisis as an excuse to come crawling back. I won't, I said simply. I didn't wait to watch him open the folder. I turned and walked upstairs to the primary bedroom, the room he had entered only twice in 3 years. By 6 o'clock the following morning, the sky outside was a dull, pearlescent gray. Rain had fallen lightly before dawn, leaving the pavement glistening under the streetlights. Mrs. Lane was already in the kitchen when I brought down my final small suitcase. When she saw me dressed in my simple wool coat, holding my bag, her lips trembled slightly. She had worked for the Whitmore family for over a decade, but during the past 3 years, she was the only person in that sprawling 2,000-foot mansion who had ever treated me like a human being rather than an inconvenience. Ma'am, Mrs. Lane whispered, setting down a tea towel. You're really going without breakfast? I have a lot to unpack at the new place, Mrs. Lane. I smiled gently, pulling a handwritten envelope from my pocket and placing it on the kitchen island. There's a small gift in here for you. Thank you for taking care of me when I was sick last winter. Her eyes grew moist. She looked toward the guest room down the hall, then back at me, lowering her voice. He doesn't know what he's throwing away, Miss Natalie. He really doesn't. It was never his to throw away. I replied softly. Take care. I picked up my bag, walked out the front door, and didn't look back. The hard-moving van was already waiting at the end of the driveway. As the iron gates slid shut behind us with a low metallic hum, I felt a strange physical weight lift off my chest. For 3 years, I had held my breath, shrinking myself down to fit into the margins of another man's life. Now, as the van drove toward the east side of the city, I finally took a deep, clear breath of fresh air. My new apartment was on the 9th floor of an older, well-maintained building overlooking a municipal park. It smelled of freshly polished hardwood and sunshine. By noon, the movers had unloaded the 6 boxes. I spent the afternoon unpacking my clothes, arranging my books on the built-in shelves, and setting up my drawing desk near the balcony window. Before I married Adrian, I had been an associate architect at a mid-size firm, a job I loved deeply, but surrendered when the marriage obligations and endless charity galas demanded my presence as Mrs. Whitmore. That evening, sitting at my new desk under the warm yellow light of a desk lamp, I opened my laptop and sent an email to my old mentor Marcus Vance. Marcus, I'm back in the city. If you still have an open desk at the studio, I'd like to return to work. The reply came less than 10 minutes later. Your desk has been waiting for 3 years. Natalie, come in on Monday. 2 weeks passed quietly. In those 2 weeks, I didn't check Adrian's social media, nor did I ask my family about him. I changed my phone number, leaving only an email address for his legal counsel to process the final court filing for the divorce decree. Meanwhile, in the grand villa on the west side of the city, the silence was of a very different kind. Mrs. Lane was ironing shirts in the laundry room when she heard the sound of glass shattering upstairs. A moment later, Rosalie's voice echoed down the marble hallway. High and shrill. Adrian, look at this kitchen. Why isn't there any fresh almond milk? And why are these towels so rough? I told you my skin is sensitive. Adrian sat at the head of the long dining table, his laptop open, a stack of quarterly financial reports spread out before him. He pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling a dull, persistent throb behind his temples. Rosalie, he said, his voice flat. Mrs. Lane handles the groceries. If you need something specific, just tell her. I did tell her, Rosalie pouted, walking into the dining room dressed in a silk robe that dragged slightly on the floor. She wrapped her arms around his shoulders from behind, leaning her chin on his top collar. She looks at me like I'm an outsider, Adrian. She used to cook those elaborate 3-course breakfast for her. Why does she only make me plain toast and fruit? Adrian didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted involuntarily to the corner of the dining table. For 3 years, that corner had been where Natalie sat every morning. She was always quiet. She never complained about the food, never raised her voice at the staff, and never interrupted him when he was reviewing files. When he brought work home, she would quietly place a cup of hot black coffee, exactly 2 sugars, no cream, on the edge of his desk and slip out without making a sound. Rosalie, on the other hand, had been living in the house for 14 days, and in those 14 days, the house felt perpetually chaotic. Her perfume, a sweet, heavy floral scent, hung in every room, overpowering the subtle cedar fragrance Natalie used to keep in the linen closets. Rosalie's clothes were strewn across the guest bedroom, and twice this week she had demanded that Adrian fire Mrs. Lane because the older woman hadn't ironed her designer dresses quickly enough. Adrian, are you listening to me? Rosalie tugged at his sleeve. I have an early meeting with the board, Adrian said, shutting his laptop with a sharp click. He stood up, pulling away from her touch. I don't have time for this today. You're always at work. Rosalie's face flushed with petulance. When we were apart, you promised that once you were free from that woman, everything would be like it used to be. We were supposed to go to Paris this weekend. That was before the board called for an emergency review of the European expansion. Adrian snapped, his patience finally snapping. The legal team found a discrepancy in the original filings from 3 years ago. I need to clear it before Friday. Rosalie stiffened slightly at the mention of the legal files from 3 years ago. Her eyes flickered with a sudden guarded tension, but she quickly smoothed her expression, throwing her arms around his waist again. Fine, fine. Don't be mad. I just miss you, that's all. Go to your meeting. As Adrian walked out to his car, he felt a strange cold restlessness settling in his chest. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out his phone, opened his messaging app out of habit, scrolling down to Natalie's contact. Her last message to him was still sitting there. Dated 2 weeks ago. Come home earlier today. I have something to discuss with you. Below it was his cold single-word reply. Okay. She had never replied to his subsequent message about staying late with Rosalie. She had simply signed the papers and walked out into the rain. He tapped on her profile picture. It was a blank default avatar. Now he typed out a short message. The legal team needs your signature on the tax transfer document for the joint filing. He pressed send. A red exclamation mark immediately appeared beside the text. Message failed to send. You are no longer in this contact network. Adrian stared at the red mark for a long time, his fingers tightening on the metal frame of his phone until his knuckles turned white. She hadn't just moved out. She had erased him completely. A month later, the annual Architectural and Urban Design Summit was held at the Grand Regency Hotel downtown. It was the biggest corporate event of the season, bringing together real estate magnates, top architectural firms, and municipal investors. As the main corporate sponsor, Whitmore Enterprise occupied the central VIP lounge. Adrian stood near the glass balcony of the ballroom holding a glass of champagne. Beside him stood Rosalie, wearing an icy blue evening gown adorned with heavy sequins. Over the past month, he had taken her to every high society event, just as he had done for the past 3 years. Back then, whenever he stood with Rosalie at these galas, he had felt a dark, bitter satisfaction, a sense that he was defying the forced marriage imposed upon him, showing the world that his heart could not be bought. But tonight, the murmurs from the crowd sounded entirely different. Is that Adrian Whitmore's former mistress? A woman's voice whispered softly from behind a nearby floral display. Current girlfriend, I suppose. Another voice replied smoothly. Though honestly, ever since Natalie Ramsey left him, Whitmore's public image has taken a hit. Did you hear? Natalie joined Vance Architecture 3 weeks ago. Her firm just won the bidding for the city's new waterfront museum project. Natalie Ramsey. I thought she was just a high society wife who did nothing all day. Are you kidding? Before she married Whitmore, she was the lead designer for the Capitol Art Center. She's brilliant. Everyone thought she gave up her career for him. But it turns out she was just keeping her head down while her father's company was restructuring. Now that she's free, she's completely taken over the design scene. Adrian froze. The champagne in his glass swirled slightly as his hand stiffened. She won the Waterfront Museum project. That was a $200 million municipal contract, a project Whitmore Enterprise had tried to secure as a developer but had been turned down because the municipal committee demanded an independent, highly innovative design team. Adrian, look at those diamond earrings over there, Rosalie said, pulling his arm and pointing toward a jewelry exhibit near the stage. They'd look so good on me for our anniversary next month. Be quiet for a second, Adrian said sharply. Rosalie shrank back, shocked by the sudden harshness in his voice. Adrian. He didn't look at her. His gaze was locked on the entrance of the ballroom. The heavy mahogany doors had opened and a small group of senior architects stepped into the room. At the center of the group stood Natalie. She was wearing a tailored emerald, green velvet jumpsuit with a deep V-neck and a silver belt that accentuated her slender waist. Her dark hair was pulled back into a sleek, elegant low bun, exposing the long, graceful line of her neck. She wore no heavy diamonds, only a pair of minimalist pearl drop earrings. She was laughing softly at something Marcus Vance was saying. Her cheeks slightly flushed, her eyes bright and alive. It was an expression Adrian had never seen on her face in 3 years. In his memory, Natalie was always a quiet, pale shadow, sitting on the edge of the living room sofa, wearing muted gray or beige dresses, her eyes calm, tired, and unreadable. Now standing under the crystal chandeliers, she radiated an effortless commanding beauty that drew the eyes of half the room. Isn't that Natalie? Rosalie whispered beside him, her voice laced with a sudden bitter venom. What is she doing here? She doesn't belong at a high-level summit like this. Adrian ignored Rosalie completely. Without realizing it, he put down his glass and began walking across the polished marble floor toward Natalie. Natalie, he called out as he approached her group. The conversation among the architects paused. Marcus Vance looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly when he recognized Adrian. Natalie turned around calmly. Her expression unchanged as her eyes met his. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. Her voice was polite, light, and completely devoid of emotion, the same tone one would use with a distant business acquaintance. The title, Mr. Whitmore, hit Adrian like a cold splash of water. For 3 years, she had called him Adrian, even when he responded with cold silence. "We need to talk," Adrian said, his gaze sweeping over her face, searching for any sign of hurt, resentment, or lingering attachment. There was none. Her eyes were as clear as water. "In private." "I don't think we have anything to discuss in private, Mr. Whitmore," Natalie said, resting one hand lightly on the portfolio folder under her arm. "The final decree was signed by the judge last Tuesday. My lawyer sent the finalized copy to your office yesterday. The transaction is complete. This isn't about the divorce agreement." Adrian gritted his teeth, stepping closer, lowering his voice so the surrounding guests wouldn't overhear. "The legal department found the original records from 3 years ago regarding our company's corporate lawsuit." "Natalie, why was your personal signature on the evidence summary that cleared Whitmore Enterprise?" Natalie raised an eyebrow slightly, as if surprised. He had only just discovered it. "Because my father's legal team handled the cross-border jurisdiction," she said casually. "I spent 3 months reviewing 5,000 pages of financial audits to extract the forged documents your former CFO tried to hide. Is there a problem with the records?" Adrian felt his breath catch in his throat. 3 years ago, when Whitmore Enterprise was hit with the corporate espionage lawsuit that threatened to bankrupt the company, he had assumed his father and the Ramsey family elders had simply paid off the regulators or used political influence to squash the case. He had believed Natalie was merely the passive beneficiary of that deal, a woman whose family leveraged his desperation to buy her a wealthy husband. He had never known that she was the one who had spent 90 days locked in a legal basement, sifting through thousands of fraudulent receipts to pull his company back from the edge of destruction. You never told me?" Adrian whispered, his voice suddenly sounding hollow. Natalie let out a tiny, almost imperceptible laugh, a soft, ironic sound. "Tell you," she looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting the warm chandeliers overhead. "Adrian, on our wedding night, you told me that I broke you and Rosalie apart. You told me not to expect you to touch me, and that if I was smart, I would stay out of your way. When would you have listened to me? And why would I offer explanations to a man who had already decided I was guilty?" Every word she spoke was quiet, but to Adrian, each sentence felt like a heavy blow to his chest. Before he could speak, Rosalie rushed over, grabbing Adrian's arm tightly. Her eyes glaring at Natalie. "Natalie Ramsey, don't play innocent here. You only helped Adrian's company back then because you wanted to become Mrs. Whitmore. You used your family's influence to push me out." Natalie looked at Rosalie, her gaze dropping to the hand clutching Adriana's arm, and then back up to Rosalie's face. "Miss Quinn," Natalie said smoothly, her voice carrying a quiet authority that instantly silenced the surrounding whispers. 3 years ago, when Whitmore Enterprise was facing liquidation and Adrian was under criminal investigation for accounting fraud, where were you? Rosalie's face went pale instantly. I was. You were in London," Natalie continued calmly, taking a step closer on a fully funded art scholarship provided by an offshore account under Whitmore Enterprise's rival firm, Vance Holdings. "You took $200,000 to leave the country the week Adrian was indicted, and you only returned 3 months after his company cleared the audit." The entire surrounding area went dead silent. Adrian turned his head sharply, staring down at Rosalie, his eyes filled with absolute shock. "What did you say?" Rosalie's lips trembled violently. "Adrian, no. She's lying. She's making it up. To destroy us. I went to London because I was heartbroken." The wire transfer records were included in the appendix of the lawsuit file. "Mr. Whitmore." Marcus Vance spoke up from beside Natalie. his tone dry and professional. My firm handled the Vance Holdings asset restructuring last year. Miss Quinn's scholarship agreement was signed personally by the late CEO of Vance Holdings, the very man who tried to orchestrate your company's hostile takeover. Natalie knew about it 3 years ago, but she chose not to tell you because she didn't want to shatter your romantic illusions while you were recovering from the corporate trial. Adrian felt the world around him tilt. He looked down at Rosalie, whose eyes were wide with panic, her hands shaking as she tried to cling to his jacket. For 3 years, he had treated Rosalie as a fragile, innocent victim, a saint who had been sacrificed on the altar of his forced marriage. He had spent 3 years paying her rent, buying her jewelry, taking her to every gala, and pouring all his guilt and devotion into her lap, all while treating the woman who had actually saved his life and company with ice-cold contempt. Is this true? Adrian's voice was terrifyingly low, a dangerously quiet roar. Adrian, listen to me. It wasn't like that. Rosalie began to cry, her delicate tears spilling over her sequin dress. They coerced me. I was scared. It doesn't matter anymore, Adrian. Natalie's voice broke through the tension. She pulled her designer coat over her shoulders and took a folder from her assistant. She looked at Adrian one last time, not with hatred, not with revenge, but with the utter devastating indifference of someone who had completely moved on. You two deserve each other, Natalie said softly. You built your entire relationship on guilt and illusions, and I hope you enjoy living in them. Excuse me. I have a project presentation to deliver. She turned, her heels clicking softly and rhythmically against the polished marble floor, and walked toward the main stage, flanked by her team of architects. She did not look back even once. The aftermath of that night was swift and ruthless. By the next morning, Adrian had his personal investigators re-examine every financial record from 3 years ago. The evidence was irrefutable. Rosalie had indeed taken the payout from his primary competitor to leave him when his empire was crumbling. The first love he had protected like a fragile glass flower was nothing more than an opportunistic mercenary who returned only when the storm had passed and the Whitmore fortune was secure again. That same afternoon, Rosalie's belongings were packed into trash bags and placed outside the iron gates of the mansion. No matter how loudly she cried or banged on the gates, the security guards remained stoic, following Adrienne's explicit orders. 2 weeks later, Rosalie was quietly removed from the social circles of the city, her name erased from every high society guest list. But for Adrian, the real punishment had only just begun. He returned to the 2,000-foot villa every evening. The house was spotless, maintained meticulously by Mrs. Lane, but it was hollow. He sat alone in the massive living room, staring at the empty couch where Natalie used to sit. He walked into the primary bedroom, the room he had entered only twice in 3 years, and opened the walk-in closet. It was entirely empty except for a faint lingering scent of cedar and clean linen. He went into the kitchen late at night, opening the double-door refrigerator. There were no handmade containers of fish stew, no braised ribs, no quiet notes left on the counter, reminding him to drink warm water after a long flight. One evening, unable to bear the silence any longer, Adrian drove his car across the city to the east side. He parked across the street from the modest apartment building near the municipal park. Rain was falling softly, reflecting the red and amber lights of the city traffic. Up on the 9th floor, a window was brightly lit. Through the clear glass, he could see Natalie. She was sitting at a large drafting table, wearing a cozy oversized sweater, her hair pinned up loosely with a pencil. A young male colleague was standing beside her, holding a cup of steaming coffee, pointing at a blueprint on the table. Natalie looked up, laughed warmly, and made a quick mark on the paper with her pen. She looked happy. She looked complete. She was living a life that had nothing to do with him. A life where the name Adrian Whitmore was nothing more than a faint closed chapter in a book she had long finished reading. Adrian sat in his dark car, holding the steering wheel until his muscles burned. He had thought that by giving her coldness, he was punishing her for taking his freedom. But now he realized the brutal truth. He had never possessed her freedom to begin with. She had given him 3 years of her grace, her competence, and her quiet devotion. And he had thrown it away for a handful of dirt. He raised a trembling hand, touched the cold window of his car, and tried to whisper her name, but the sound died in his throat, swallowed entirely by the pouring rain outside. 6 months later, the grand opening of the city waterfront cultural center was held on a clear, crisp autumn afternoon. The building was a masterpiece of modern architecture, a sweeping fluid structure of glass and white steel that looked as though it were rising directly out of the harbor waters. It was praised by critics nationwide as the most brilliant design of the decade. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Natalie stood at the center of the podium, surrounded by city officials, international press, and her design team. When the mayor handed her the golden scissors, the crowd erupted into thunderous applause. In the far back row of the public gallery, standing behind a crowd of reporters, a man in a dark trench coat stood quietly. Adrian looked at her from afar. His face was leaner than it used to be, his eyes shadowed with a permanent, quiet exhaustion. Whitmore Enterprise was still prosperous, but his life was an empty shell, revolving around endless board meetings and silent nights in a house that felt more like a tomb. He watched as Natalie cut the red ribbon. She smiled radiant under the bright autumn sunshine, her eyes glowing with confidence, pride, and freedom. A reporter raised a microphone toward her. "Miss Ramsey, with the monumental success of this project, do you have any regrets about the past 3 years you spent away from the architectural world?" Natalie held the microphone, her gaze sweeping over the crowd, passing right over the distant spot where Adrian stood without stopping for even a microsecond. "No regrets," Natalie said softly, her clear, melodious voice echoing through the loudspeakers across the plaza. "Every path we walk teaches us what is worth holding on to and what must be let go. I am simply grateful that I walked out in time to welcome my own spring." The applause swelled again, loud and bright, echoing over the blue waters of the bay. Natalie turned away from the podium, surrounded by friends, colleagues, and flowers, walking forward into her bright, limitless future. And behind her, standing alone in the fading shadows of the afternoon, Adrian finally closed his eyes, accepting the long, cold winter he had built entirely for himself.